presents Speak Your Truth with yours truly, Vivett Dukes. Tonight, we are going to be discussing learning pods, a very hot topic that has come up in recent weeks for parents who are not comfortable sending their children back into the brick and mortar school building, and also who have had challenges, concerns, difficulties where remote learning is concerned. I just posted an article recently. I'd like to share it with you to give more context for anyone who might not be sure what a learning pod is. There's a New York Times article that was published today that a colleague of mine, Maritza Gertie, thank you so much, shared on her page, and I took the liberty of reposting it. The New York Times article is entitled $25,000 Pod Schools, How Well-to-Do Children Will Weather the Pandemic. And so over and over again, we are seeing that the divide, that chasm between the haves and the have-nots financially, where education is concerned, continues to widen. Now, this is taking place in Hastings on the Hudson, which is a village just outside of Midtown Manhattan, a very wealthy village. And so parents with wealth, white parents with wealth, are setting up these pods for their children. However, it's very interesting to me, and I'll just read what I wrote, that the whole concept of learning pods is merely a replication of indigenous cooperative educational learning models. The only difference here is the hefty price tag that makes it unaffordable for and inaccessible to working and middle class families. Now, right after I posted that and had this, I'm just showing you how things just lined up. Even prior to reading that article, I had our guest tonight already lined up. She is an expert where learning pods are concerned. We're going to hear from Deidra Jones in a minute. But I recently learned that the National Parents Union, and I'm quoting directly from President Kerry Rodriguez, who says the National Parents Union will be giving out $200,000 in grants in the next 3 weeks to parent and family-led organizations who are looking to develop family pods, micro schools, and other innovative ideas to support their children this year. They will be putting out a call for submission next week, and some are already in the works. Parents, this is an answered prayer to so many of you. Educators, this is also an answered prayer for many of you. Students, this is an answered prayer for so many of you. And for those who are not familiar with learning pods, or if you know someone who is interested in learning pods, if you've been hearing this buzz, I implore you to please listen closely and share this broadcast because it will be life-changing. With that being said, I would like to bring on our guest for tonight, Ms. Deidra Jones. Deidra, welcome.
Hello.
Hi, how are you?
I'm fine. Thank you for having me here tonight.
Thank you for being here tonight. So for our guests out there, I learned about Deidra from our guest on Monday, Tanisha Gibbs. As we were speaking, she said, there's someone I need you to meet. This really wonderful epitome of excellence is how she described you, by the way. This young woman named Deidra Jones. So she connected us, and Deidra and I started talking, and lo and behold, Deidra is nothing short of an expert in where learning pods and cooperative learning are concerned. Deidra, could you give our viewers a little bit more background about who you are, your educational background, and what makes you an expert in this area?
Yes. So my name is Deidra. I'm from New Jersey. I currently live in New Jersey. And I've worked in education for the past 7 years. My last 3 years in education was as a kindergarten teacher. So I worked in the early childhood space. And right now, what I've been doing since June of 2019 has been hosting workshops, traveling and speaking at conferences just around institutional racism in American education, how it affects Black and Brown youth, and just how a lot of schools are really adhering to harmful, traumatic ways of delivering learning to our children, and just why we need to reclaim, our educational spaces. I'm currently a third-year PhD candidate at Saybrook University. My major is transformative social change, which is a field that pretty much merges a lot of different fields of study. So there's sociology, there's psychology, social work, education, economics, to name a few. And what we do in that program, we examine how certain groups navigate different social systems. So we examine it from a race, class, and gender standpoint. We study systems of oppression and how power and privilege are at play within these different spheres. And then we take it a step further by strategizing strategic ways to bring about alternative ways of being that really promote transformative social change, liberation, and ultimately a society that is grounded in love ethics. So what my particular focus on in terms of research is around amplifying Indigenous methodologies and knowledge systems to really increase social emotional learning development and skills in early childhood learners. So I'm definitely happy to be here to talk about learning pods, to talk about creating alternative means of learning for our children.
Oh, we are so happy you are here. I am so happy that you are here, and I speak on behalf of Speak Your Truth, on behalf of the National Parents Union. I'm so happy that you are here. Tanisha Gibbs, thank you for introducing me to Deidra. Meredith Chase Mitchell, thank you for introducing me to Tanisha Gibbs, because none of this is by accident.
Right.
For families who, let's dig a little bit deeper into what learning pods are. Mm-hmm. Could you explain that for our viewers who might not know what they are?
Yeah, so learning pods have a number of names. They're called learning pods, or you might have heard of learning cooperatives, or you might have heard of homeschool cooperatives. So basically homeschooling or cooperatives or pods, they're alternatives to being within like the institution of a school building. So it's this idea that learning really happens when we're out in the community, learning really happens when we're at home, and learning really happens from each other. And it's a non-standardized approach to teaching our children. And it's very much a way that centers around culture, it centers around the need for community. And, especially during a time like COVID-19, and racial tension and uprisings, it also centers around safety and public safety for our children. So learning pods are independent. They're not affiliated with like federal rules and regulations. And you could have as much freedom as you want with a learning pod to design it the way you want in terms of your schedule, in terms of the kind of content you want to teach your children. I know now more than ever, we want our children to be able to see themselves in the curriculum that they're learning. We want to affirm our children. We want to affirm their Blackness. We want to affirm their culture. If you're someone who's subscribes to a religious faith, you want to affirm them in that. And having these learning cooperatives is sharing space with other families and other people in your community who are like-minded. And you come together and you share these resources and you educate your children together. So that's what a pod and a cooperative learning space looks like.
Is this a new model? Because it seems that it's been co-opted from Black, Indigenous people of color. What you just described to me is something that I've always grown up knowing about. When I was growing up, it was like, oh, at what age are we going to eventually send Vivett to school? I had friends who didn't go to school until maybe second or third grade, until when parents felt that they were ready to release them from the all-day safety of their home into now another model of schooling. And this seems like a very Indigenous model. Is it, or is this something that white people have thought up? Because it seems from the article I read that it's like aha, we created something. When did they really?
Right. So learning cooperatives are very much indigenous to indigenous natives, Blacks, Latinx community. This was our original way of doing things, especially during racial apartheid here in the US, where schools were legally segregated. And I read a lot of bell hooks, like I love bell hooks.
Yes.
And in a lot of her books, she always talks about having the privilege to grow up during a time of racial segregation, because she went to schools that were in her community with people who lived in her community. The teachers were people who were of her community, who were Black. And not only did she have the chance to learn like the core content that you would learn in school, but because she was learning from her, like her people, the schools were also very affirming, right? So you go from this place where you feel like a first class citizen within your school, within your community, you're being affirmed. There isn't a case where you have to fear of never being successful because of the color of your skin, because you have an example right in front of you with your teacher and with the people who live around you. And something that she said that really shifted my mindset. So I don't want to make it like a debate on whether I'm pro like integration or segregation, because I'm not trying to go there. But something she said was, when schools were racially integrated, it wasn't the white children who came to the Black schools. It was the Black schools that were shut down, and Black children were bused miles away from their homes to now have to integrate into white spaces where they were treated like second-class citizens and were made to feel inferior to the white students that they were learning from or learning with. And, you know, she talked about how she went from being in gifted and talented classes to now being in a white school where she wasn't eligible for being in those spaces because they were limited, you know, only to white people. So I will say that learning pods, learning cooperatives, you know, they're just as indigenous to us as, you know, our birthright. And, you know, it's the way we've always learned. It didn't have to happen in school, but since the schools were racially segregated, it happened there. But then also it happened in the church community. It happened in your neighborhood. You know, you might have went down the street to like Miss Ella's house, and, you know, Miss Ella had a Bible study with you about something that, you know, you didn't learn in your house because maybe your parents might not be Christian. Or, you know, you went down the street to John's house and you learned wood shop, you know, with him. You learn how to pick up certain skills from different people in the community. And there was never a feeling of, no, you shouldn't go to that person's house or you shouldn't be there. It was very communal. It was very in-house in the community. And there wasn't an issue of class because, you know, everyone's bunched into like this one community because of redlining and segregation. So there was never well, this place is only preserved for the poor people and rich people can't live here, because everybody was in one same community. And it's very much the same for indigenous native populations, you know, who are on reservations right now, which are very under-resourced. But, you know, there's like a silver lining because they get to retain so much of their culture, and they get to teach their children their ways and their language, and, you know, the attire that they wear, the chants that they do, the rituals that they do, they get to keep those things in house. So learning pods were indigenous to who we are. You know, some of the first institutions of schools, like the buildings of schools themselves, were for puritanical white children, you know, and it was their way of pushing their religious agenda onto each other and to sort of keeping that Latin language going, and, you know, the Calvinist Christian ideology going, and they were only preserved for white children. But, you know, in an effort to naturalize other cultures and erase our way of doing things, we were then thrown into these institutions, like these school buildings, and our languages were stripped away from us, our identity was stripped away from us. We're not learning about ourselves. We're not learning any information that's affirming to who we are. And we're forced into this assimilation process of, you know, European and Eurocentric thought. So, yeah, like opening up a learning pod, opening up a homeschool cooperative, that's our way of reclaiming what was naturally ours to begin with.
That's our way of reimagining schools. This is a way to reimagine schools that is a very much a part of who we are at our core. Before we forget, I'd like you to look up, if you don't already know, the research of Dr. Deidra Houchin. She is from the University of Central Florida, I believe. She is from Gainesville, Florida. She's done extensive research on the impact that integration had on Black and Brown children, and how it was detrimental to their learning. Exactly everything you just said. So as part of your studies, she is a modern bell hooks, if you will. And not that bell hooks is not modern, but her research is like within the last 5 years. Definitely look her up, Dr. Deidra Houchin, a very good friend of mine as well. So now that we have a little bit more clarity as to what learning pods are, what resources would someone need, would families, parents, communities need to set up a homeschool learning pod?
So it's not as complicated as people think it is. And it's actually, like, the purpose of a co-op is definitely a way to build accountability within your community. All you need is a group of people who have a communal mindset, who want to come together and make this work. So it's just playing upon your strengths. So it's figuring out, as a parent, as an adult, what are you strong with, right? So for me, I might be strong with reading and literacy, and I might not be good with math, but I know, like, my next door neighbor wants to be a part of this, and my next door neighbor is really good at math and science. So we're going to come together and we're going to put together a math and science curriculum for our kids, and we're going to invite the people down the hall. Like, if we're living in an apartment building, we're going to invite the people down the hall to come get in on this. Hey, you have 3 kids. We're starting this learning co-op. I'm going to be doing the English. So-and-so is going to be doing the math and science. Do you want to, like, bring your kids over too? And if it's like a yes, then you can ask the parent, well, you know, what's something that you can do to contribute to this learning space? And the parent might be a creative person. You know, they might play a guitar or something. Oh, well, I can do music class, you know, once a night for the kids. So then the kids go to that person's house once a night for a music class. And that's literally how cooperatives work. It's about utilizing the resources that you have. I think a lot of times when we want to start learning cooperatives, we think that we have to have like $1 million, right? Like, we got to have like state of the art materials, we got to have a building, we got to have like so much. But all you really need is community. And that's the most important bottom line to starting a cooperative. You need to have a community. You also need to come up with a schedule. So what days, what hours, like what each hour is going to look like of the day, who's going to manage what, and who's going to, like, you know, who's going to have like the responsibility of doing maybe like field trips. You want to do field trips. So it's about assigning tasks, figuring out who's good with what. It's about getting your children together. It's also about deciding like the age ranges of each child. You know, I know, like, with Montessori education, which is also an alternative curriculum that parents could use, it's specifically set up for multi-ages to operate in the same space. So you can have kids who are between the ages of 3 and 6 in the same learning space, and it won't affect like any child's learning process or stunt any child's learning growth, just because they're different ages. Because the way the curriculum is designed is for kids to lead their own learning, and you as an adult, you're facilitating it, you're guiding them through the process. So if a kid walks over to, like, let's say if a kid walks over to like the science table and they want to learn how to do something, you give that child autonomy to want to explore that. And you as the adult, you're just guiding them through the process. So it's very much a decolonization process. As a parent who's gone through like a K-12 like school process to now be in a space where it's complete independence. It's complete autonomy. But learning cooperatives are essentially easy, to start if there's strong accountability within the group, if everyone is bought into the mission, if everyone, is playing their part. So that's why I always say the bottom line important thing of a cooperative is community.
Yeah, I'm very familiar with the Maria Montessori model. As a matter of fact, when my sister was looking for schools for her son,
Mm-hmm.
this week she was in Georgia at the time, and she wasn't happy with what she was seeing in the traditional public school model. And I said to her, well, look, was studying at the time, said the Montessori model really resonates with who I am, because it's about learning and exploring on your own and through play, and having an environment where the child is really directing his or her own growth, and you get to see what they're interested in, so that you as the parent know how to guide them. So parents, I'm reiterating that for viewers, anyone watching, if you're not familiar with Maria Montessori's model, that is a place where you can start to learn more about ways in which to set up your pod, or models that already exist that you can follow. So we've mentioned bell hooks and we've mentioned Maria Montessori, just being clear about notes and where parents can go if they're interested in setting this up. Now, what about in this case, we're in a pandemic still, and you're mentioning going to different houses. Like, what are ways that parents can mitigate having their child in a learning pod while at the same time keeping them safe? Because that's one of the big issues about sending their child back into the traditional brick and mortar building.
Right. So my advice on that would be to limit the number of children that you have in your cooperative. So you might want to start off with maybe 5 kids, because 5 kids are easy to manage, especially if you're in a small space. And then also you just want to take the proper safety measures. So you want to make sure the place is clean. You're wiping down materials, Lysol wipes, Lysol spray. And then, it's easier to social distance in a house or, a community center than it is to social distance in a classroom where you might have 30 kids in one class and you're trying to figure out, well, how do I create 6 feet apart for 30 kids when, just with the 30 kids being together, it's already cramped. So I would say maybe like have a cap, and then also just make sure that the community that you're building, there are people that you're close with. You want to start off with people you're most familiar with, and that they're being safe too. And then I will also because I don't see children being able to keep a mask on all day, right? Because
I don't either.
I don't like having the mask on because it's hard to breathe. So I would say just making sure Lysol is our friend. We're spraying things down. We're taking temperatures of children, and because children naturally touch, and it's something that they naturally do. So just making sure the things that they're touching is cleaned and wiped down, and that can even be a health and safety lesson that you have with them. Doing your cooperative, you make it into a fun and engaging game, and it doesn't have to be so stressful or traumatizing. You just make it fun. You have a cleanup song whenever it's time to clean, and you have the kids singing the cleanup song, and they're wiping things down with you, and just making sure they're covering their their mouth with their elbows if they have a cough, just things like that. You just have to make things really fun for kids. So those are some things that I would do, in my learning pod to make sure that children are safe. I will also encourage just having some outdoor time too, where children can explore. So, you might do science in the park one day where you have the kids collecting leaves or, looking at different trees. And it gives them that space to be outside, but then they're also not on top of each other because they're outside in the park and they can explore a little bit more. So it's just about creating alternative methods and just getting into a habit of maybe changing up the learning space a little bit from what we're traditionally used to.
This sounds very geared towards, yeah, I have two questions that can come to mind. Firstly, this sounds very geared towards parents of younger children. Is there an age where a learning pod doesn't work anymore?
There is no age cap for a learning pod. The older children get, the more autonomous they become. And, learning pods are a lot more easier with older kids because they command their learning. I actually homeschooled my brother for a couple of years. And so he would come downstairs and the materials will already be laid out. And sometimes like he'd be downstairs before I get down there and he's already on math when the first thing was like English. I'm just like, well, wait a minute. Like, we didn't start yet, but he's already done with the worksheets, the assignments and stuff. So the older kids get, the more they become like used to the routine of, what a homeschool looks like. They tend to take more leadership in their learning. So I think there is no age gap for a learning pod at all. It's just so interesting that I was in Boston back in January and I went to this small little Montessori conference, and I got to meet a bunch of women like all over the country who are either starting Montessori schools, who work in learning cooperatives, who own cooperatives, or who's looking to create something different. And I met a woman who has a cooperative high school. And, and I was very intrigued by that because I had never heard of a cooperative high school. So I was asking her about that process. And she was telling me that there is a wide variety of things that students can learn when they're with her. And they don't have to learn it all at the same time. So if one kid is really interested in this algebra lesson, she's not going to take him away from that, right? She's going to let him learn algebra. She's going to let him facilitate, and she's going to be there as his guide, walking him through these algebra concepts and stuff like that. Because children are very independent if you let them, and the older they get, the more independence they actually want. And then there might be another student over here who's interested in a history lesson. So you're basically allowing children to learn when their brain is best wired to be learning the material. So I thought it was really cool. I was like, I've never heard of a high school cooperative, but she says the children enjoy it. There's an outdoor component where she has a garden in her backyard, and the children are able to go out and, pull up different fruits and vegetables and make their own snacks. There's chickens and goats out there, and the children can tend to feeding them and cleaning them. So it's very much it's like you're allowing children to create the learning space, and you're just there facilitating the things that they're curious about and things they have questions for.
What about parents who say, well, Deidra, that sounds all well and good and that's wonderful, Vivett, but I have to work?
And that's where community comes in. Because you have to work, but if there's willing people in the community who have the privilege to be able to be at home, who's doing the cooperative, then you can easily, drop your child off at the cooperative space. And, that's why I keep saying the important piece is community, right? Because, I find in our community, we have a hard time with vulnerability. Because we create, we internalize this mindset that we are resilient people. And in order for us to be resilient, we have to pretty much go through and swallow the trauma that we deal with. And we have to really allow ourselves to feel the hurt that we're dealing with. And because we're supposed to be these strong and resilient people, I can't ask the woman down the street for help, or I can't ask my mom for help because I need to do it for myself. But, like I said, there was a point in time in our ancestry where it wasn't like that. It was, if I didn't have, you didn't have. If you had it, that means I got it too. And I think that we really need to get to a place where we're able to, just, I always say it's a decolonization process, because we really need to redefine what it means to have love and care in our community for each other. That doesn't always have to revolve around material privileges. So it's not the idea that I'm doing something for you to get something in return. It's the idea that I'm doing something for you because I love you and I care about your well-being. And I know that you're struggling right now with sending your kid back to school or not, and you don't want to, but I also know that you have to work. So I'm going to take your kid, you know, while you're at work, and I'm going to teach them these things. And while material resources, they are important, they shouldn't be the center of what we revolve our lives around. And the thing with, and this is probably going off on a tangent, but like the thing with capitalist, you know, thinking that's really rooted in like white supremacy is that it will really have us living our lives through like this lens of deficit and need, where if we aren't able to acquire a certain amount of, you know, material possessions, then we don't feel like we're adequate or we don't feel like we're succeeding. But the thing with communal living and building communal spaces is that it really challenges that dominant culture that leads us to believe that. So if she got to go to work, she can go to work. I will take your kid. We're going to learn together. And then I'm going to, you know, I'm going to keep you in the loop on what we're learning. And that's the beauty of it being a cooperative, because it's about accountability. And it's about, you know, creating co-spaces. And I can't co a space or co an initiative if I'm by myself, you know, like co is like a team effort. So, and I think, you know, we need to really start thinking about communal care at this point, and just how learning pods are communal care, and we care for one another, like in like community.
Yes. And we bring so many talents to the table. During this season of remote learning, when things just got shut down very quickly, many of my students' parents were saying, listen, I can't do this work. I don't know how to do it with them. It was becoming very overwhelming. And I heard the anxiety in their voices. And I said to them, well, I remember saying to one parent in particular, well, what are you doing today? Like, what's going on at home? She's like, listen, I'm just trying to cook, how to clean, like all the different things she's doing. I said, everything that you just talked about are lessons for your child. Bring them in along. So if you're cooking dinner, bring them in. And as you're cooking, they're learning. That's how I learned how to cook.
Same.
It is. I was in the kitchen with my grandma, with my mom, and just being around and watching, and they'd show me certain things and tell me certain things. Remember, make sure before you do this, do that. And that is how we learn, you know. And also, because a lot of what you're saying is just affirming how I grew up and things that I grew up hearing and seeing and learning. My grandmother, my family's from Jamaica, and my grandmother would say two things that relate to this. She would always say, every mickle, make a muckle. Every little bit counts. There's nothing you're bringing that's too small. And she would always say, I'm going to say it in patois, listen, if you have somebody come over and not even one green banana, it must can't share with everybody. If it's one little thing, share it. That's a community model. If you have one green banana and someone comes to your house, you cut it up, you share it, you whip it up, butter, whatever you got to do, mash that sucker up, and before you know it, it'll stretch. One final thing that was learned, because I grew up in a Christian faith-based home, little is much when God is in it. And when that's the love model that I hear you talking about, that community model, when it's coming from a place of love, when we're looking at it like not just your child, this one's child, Tommy's child up the road. No, they are our children. All of them are ours. When we start approaching a learning education community from that model, we see just how much richer not only our children become, but we become, because we start unearthing the layers of pain and hurt and trauma and start reconnecting with who we really are. So much of your saying, I think our viewers watching this would agree that it's hitting home with a lot of our upbringings and things that have been lost, we're moving far away from that model. And I see this this time of this pandemic, it's a season for us to now re-examine who we are. And in this reimagination of schools, learning pods are very much a part of that reimagination.
Yep,
Thank
definitely.
you for bringing that to the table. So what are there any cons for learning pods that parents might, be concerned about or should be concerned about? Are there any negatives to it? Because so far we've just been singing all of its praises.
Yeah. So I will say that when you start a learning co-op, um, there are some, like, different states have different regulations for homeschooling, but the first thing you want to do is definitely contact your district to unenroll your kid in like traditional school, because what ends up happening is if your child is registered at a particular school and they're not there, they're racking up absences. And then it becomes like a truancy case because your child wasn't in school that they were registered at. So if you unregister your child from the school, you can register them with the state as a homeschool child. And some of the recommendations that a lot of people who homeschool have is that you should keep record of, you should keep record of everything. So if you're homeschooling based on a particular schedule that you created, you want to have a copy of that schedule. You want to maybe create like some worksheets or like some assessments for your kid to take to have proof that, okay, my child has been learning at home. This is what they've been learning. Another bit of advice is sometimes you can actually go to the district and get a copy of the curriculum that the schools are using. So if you plan on creating your own lesson plans, and if you want to create your own lesson plans, a lot of states, they want you to have lessons that are aligned with their standards. So if you're going to, but you can teach it any way you want. So you don't have to like follow the curriculum to the T. What the schools just want to make sure is that the child is still mastering objectives. So say, for example, if you do decide to keep your child or your children in homeschool all the way up to college, they'll have like a record so that, when they apply to colleges, there'll be some documentation of, their learning process. So you can get a curriculum from the district. You can also get a copy of the curriculum from the school that they were attending to help you create some lesson plans around that. But the pro about homeschooling is that it's self-paced, so you don't have to do like what the school is doing at the same time the school is doing. You can insert your own cultures, languages, and things into the lesson. So the reason why I would say like those things are a con, I wouldn't say they're cons, but they're things to like look for, because you don't want to start the homeschool process or the pod and then your child is, racking up absences at school that they don't attend anymore. Or you don't want to spend the whole year, maybe teaching your kid things that aren't really grade specific or that they should be learning. So maybe in like third grade, they're supposed to be learning decimals, but you haven't gotten to decimals yet, like the whole year. So, your child doesn't know what decimals are. So it's just a way for you to really have a guideline on what they should be learning at the age they should be learning. So that's like those are the only things to look for. It's just making sure that you're keeping record of everything, because you don't want like a legal battle when, because that ended up happening to my family before. My brother was still getting absent letters from the school that he was attending, and then it became a court case because they didn't know that he was being homeschooled because it wasn't documented. But the thing that saved him is that my mom actually had gotten a homeschool curriculum that was already made online. So she had like worksheets and, she had like some little assessments and stuff to show as proof, like, oh, this is what he's been learning at home. So yeah, it's just the record keeping part. But if you know somebody in your co-op that's really good with record keeping, that can be like their responsibility.
I was just going to say that, like the, person in the office,
yeah,
who takes care of all the records. But this is important because there is a legal piece to this as well. You don't want your child to be truant, because then that does invite ACS, that's what it's called, New York, into your environment. You could be charged with being educational negligence of your child, and you don't want that. What about parents who have students with special learning needs who currently have individualized education plans? I've heard a lot from parents who are saying, you know, having them at home just was a lot. They didn't get the services that they needed. How would they navigate homeschooling and learning pods?
So I think like my advice for a child with special needs is I will hire a tutor, because I know like for the end of like the final school year, all of the kids were doing remote learning, but there was no accommodations for students with special needs. So it's just like, how do you expect them to sit in front of a computer and do assignments when they need like that additional support? So in cases like that, you can have like what's a one-on-one para or a tutor in your home. You can either outsource through a company, or if there's someone in the co-op who's really good with like either accommodations, giving children extra time on things, who's really good at de-escalating, like if it's a child who is prone to having like certain episodes, if you have someone in your pod, they can get training. So there's like CPR first aid, and then there's also certain state trainings that they're able to get to really be able to work with special needs children. So I would definitely like encourage, if it's a family with that situation, to get additional support, and don't do it by yourself, and don't feel like you need to do it by yourself, and have like and get the proper trainings that you are that you should be getting to work with children with special needs.
Wow. I had a list of questions for you. We've really covered them. Um, Is there anything else you would like to share just in general about learning pods, about the work that you're doing, the research, people who are thinking about seriously taking this on?
So I will say in our communities, and you know, Black and Hispanic communities, and just even looking at a class point, low SES communities, there's this idea that there's a learning gap that exists between our children and children in more affluent communities.
Can you explain what low SES means for those that might not know?
Yes, so low SES means low socioeconomic status. So it's usually working class families or families who are teetering like the poverty line. So when we say low SES, that's inclusive of race, because it's not just Black and Hispanic families who are considered low SES. There's white low SES families too. So I think that like there's this misconception about a learning gap. But one of the things that I always ask people who bring up the topic of a learning gap is I reference the show Are You Smarter Than a Fifth Grader? And it's, you know, if you haven't watched it, I don't think it comes on anymore, but it's a show where there will be a small class of children who are in the fifth grade, and then the contestant will be an adult, and they will have to pick certain school topics, and it's like a trivia game. And if you get it wrong, then it goes to a fifth grader, and they have to answer the question. And if they get it right, you know, they get the point. And I've rarely seen an adult person win that show. I've rarely seen, and it's because like these children, they come like the schools that I grew up in. I did not learn Greek mythology. Like I was not learning Greek mythology in K through 5. I was not learning Chinese. Like I was not learning like Russian history, classical literature. Like, you know, I learned the basics, you know, or what was considered the basics. So when I tell people like there is no learning or achievement gap, there's an opportunity gap. Because when you go into these affluent schools with like the real pretty buildings and the state of the art appliances and stuff, these kids are learning college curriculum. You know, they're learning languages. They have the option to take Spanish, French, Chinese, Russian, German. They have the opportunity to really take like hands-on TV production classes, you know, actual circulating school newspaper. You know, like there's just so many opportunities. They're having science fairs, and you know, they're doing extravagant science projects. They're doing school plays and productions, and it's something that we rarely see anymore in our schools, because there's this idea that we need to fill the kids' day with only the things that they need, which is just a full day of literacy and a full day of math. And, they're cutting funding in arts programs, they're cutting funding in sports teams. There's hardly any enrichment. So when I think about the learning gap, I'm like, well, the reason why children aren't achieving at the same rate as children in affluent communities is because they're not being given the resources or the opportunity to learn the things that they're learning there. So I will say the thing with learning pods is that it really alleviates that whole like mythical ideology, because now you're in a community where you get to decide what your kids are exposed to. You get to decide what they're learning. You get to decide what they don't need to learn. And what you're really doing is the things that they're doing in the affluent communities, right? You're giving them necessary skills that they need to learn. And then you're giving them variety. So if your kid woke up tomorrow like, Mom, I want to learn how to speak French. And it's just like, okay, well, let's do some French. But if they go to a school that doesn't offer that, then they're not going to have the option to explore that. So I will say that learning pods, like that's one of the really huge benefits of a learning pod, is that it gives the autonomy to teach and learn like what kids want to learn, and then also what they need to learn. So you can like remove all the extra fluff and really get down to like the things that are necessary. And you can do art all day if you want. You can do music all day if you want. And not have to worry about the program being cut from the school because of funding, and things like that. So that's something I wanted to name, just about the misconception of, learning gaps.
Deidra, how could someone reach out to you if they wanted to learn more about the research you're doing? How could they get in contact with you?
So I'm reachable via Instagram. I tend to post a lot of resources on Instagram too. And it's just my name is Deidra L. Jones. I also have a website, which is DeidraLJones.com. And it has like some resources. It has my contact information on it, if you want to shoot me an email. And like I said, it also has like some of the research that I've been doing as well, like some articles that I've published, and just like some projects that I'm working on.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for being here tonight. Thank you for you are so welcome, for pouring into our community here at the National Parents Union, our community at Speak Your Truth. I believe you've offered many, many, many people an alternative that they couldn't conceptualize or see as being possible. You've made a crooked way straight. You've really brought in minds. I know you've done that for me. Many of these questions I asked you were questions I had about pods, and that's as a mom and even as an educator. I'm like, okay, how is this going to work? What does this look like? One thing I do want to ask, is payment involved? Should that be something that the community talks about? Because one of the things that I noticed off the bat when white privileged communities were engaging in learning pods was the money that they're saying, well, we're paying tens of thousands of dollars, and that's what's attractive to many educators. Like, oh, I might make more teaching in a pod than I would go to school. Could you talk about that?
So yeah, money is something that definitely makes learning pods and cooperatives inaccessible in our community. It is a really top concern. What I would say is, if you're starting off a small learning pod with just a few children, I would say like create like a community pot, amongst the families that you're working with. And each family can contribute like a certain amount of money a week or every 2 weeks based on pay. And it's a community thing, so the money in the pot, it can go to supplies, it can go to a trip, it can go to, maybe you might want to have a pizza party one day, and you can put that money in the pot, and, it's there for the community. I would say on a larger scale, in terms of learning pods, there are so many grants that are not being used. There's so much money funding education initiatives. And it's really important that we have an understanding of what we have access to. So yeah, there's a lot of grant money for education initiatives. You can even like go as far as registering your cooperative as a nonprofit. And what that does is make you eligible for education grants and loans at a higher estimate. So you can be eligible for $10,000, $30,000 for your learning cooperative if you register as a nonprofit. And that's something that a lot of these white affluent communities are doing. They're putting their money together and they're getting these nonprofit 501c3s. And then, you know, there's somebody in the pod who has legal expertise or who has like a background in grants or business, and they're all doing it together. Like we're like, so-and-so is going to do the grant application and so-and-so is going to like come together with the money to get the LLC or the 501c3. So that's an option, you know, but I think what we really want to start doing is keeping like the money like in our community. So yeah, I would definitely suggest looking into 501c3 status. If you're like really serious about having a pod that you want to sustain long term. Otherwise, if you just want to have a short term learning pod experience, then I would do like a community pod.
And an LLC also, you mentioned, would be?
Well, yeah, I wouldn't even do an LLC. I would do a 501c3, like a nonprofit.
Okay. Or just keep it grassroots.
Yeah. And then with grassroots, you would just look for community donations. And that's sort of what people are sort of leaning to now because of the uprisings. Like people are starting to want to give money directly to the people and not to like businesses and stuff. So you'll see a lot of like Cash Apps and like Venmos and, you know, just like cash sharing apps and stuff where people want to give the money like directly like to the people without all the bank interference and stuff. So, but that's like more acceptable for like a smaller like short term like grassroots. And then just looking into community projects. There's a lot of restaurants who are supplying free meals. So you might be able to partner with a restaurant to supply lunch for the kids like twice a week. You might be able to partner with community organizations for field trips. One of the last 2 summers, I've worked with an organization called Sadie Nash Leadership Project. And it's a youth development program that specifically works with girls and gender expansive youth. So for our field trips, what we usually do is do like guest features of people that are like in the community. So if there's like a museum in the community, we want to go and like talk to that museum person and get the kids in there. Or if there's like a restaurant, we want to go to the restaurant and the kids might learn about how to make a certain meal, but then they get to eat the meal. So it's, you know, it's just about seeing like who's in your community and who's willing to like offer services, either to little or no cost. So it's really grassroots. So like that's a really grassroots approach.
Well, I want to remind all of our viewers again, and remind you too as well, Deidra, that the National Parent, I'm reading this directly from our president, Kerry Rodriguez. The National Parents Union will be giving out $200,000 in grants in the next 3 weeks to parent and family-led organizations who are looking to develop family pods, micro schools, and other innovative ideas to support their children this year. We'll be putting out a call for submission next week. So stay tuned. You can go to the National Parents Union. That will be posted on our website. That will be posted on speakyourtruth.org. That will be posted. You can contact me at Vivett at npunion.org. you can reach out to Deidra. She's given you her contact information. I also wanted to mention, in terms of resources for families, just the nuts and bolts, like books and pens and paper and pen. Please follow at Ms. MZ Urban Educator on Instagram. She does a lot of work in going to Dollar Tree and really showing what wonderful resources they have there. Everything is $1, and there's no need for you to pay more than that. So if it's a matter of just getting, and they have like I use this stuff in my own classroom. So those are just ways, as we're thinking about how to not let money be the focus, as you said, and not let money be a hindrance in creating an alternative form of education that is best for you, that's best for your child, that's best for your family, and that's best for your community. Yeah. Deidra, thank you so much for being here tonight. You have provided us so much information. I'm very grateful to you. You're quite welcome. Have a wonderful rest of the night. And we will be seeing more of you on the National Parents Union. Yeah, I have a feeling many of my colleagues here are going to be reaching out to you to have you on their show.
Okay, thank you so much. I always appreciate the opportunity to talk about the children, to make sure our children are getting what they need, and even parents, making sure parents are getting what they need. So thank you so much for this opportunity.
Absolutely, you're so welcome. Have a wonderful rest of the night.
You too.
Right. Good night, everyone. That's it for tonight. We hope this has been edifying to you. I truly believe that it has. Again, we thank Deidra Jones for being here. And this is Vivett Dukes with the National Parents Union presents Speak Your Truth. Signing off for now, but I will see you again on Monday, our next show on Monday. And who knows what wonderful guests we will have then. You'll just have to come on and see. Thank you so much. Have a great night. Bye.